Hey, Dog Nation. My name's Brandon Adams. Welcome into this edition of Dog Nation Freeze Frame, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. It's been such a fun series to do this spring as we look at some of the key contributors for Georgia the upcoming season. Also, some of the guys that we'll see on G Day on Saturday. And today, I think we have a very special one picked out for you. Going to talk a lot about Georgia running back James Cook, and going to do that with our terrific Dog Nation analyst, John Stinchcomb. That's all on the way. Before that, though, as I said, today's edition of Dog Nation Freeze Frame brought to you by our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And this is the time of year in which it's hot outside. You want to cool in the inside. The air conditioning's on where I am right now. Big guy that I am, you'd be seeing sweat beads rolling down my forehead if it wasn't. And obviously, you want that air conditioning to stay inside. There's a big window next to me. You don't want that thing sneaking, that air sneaking out, inefficient windows, inefficient doors. You don't want that. And that's what Pella Window and Door of Georgia can prevent for you. They can make your house feel better on the inside. They can make it look better on the outside when it comes to those energy efficient windows and doors. They're a nationally known company. That means they have unparalleled resources they can put to work for you. They're also a locally owned branch right here in Georgia, which means the service is going to be top notch there as well. And great savings for you to take advantage of right now. You can get 10% off your entire project or 0% APR for 24 months. Big deals there when it comes to my friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia. A couple different ways for you to get in touch. Website, pellaofga.com/dognation. That's pellaofga.com/dognation. You can also give them a call, 678 excuse me 1 second. My eyes sometimes not as good as I'd like for them to be. How about this? 678-638-1496. That's 678-638-1496. The good news is it's a great experience when you dial that number. You can get in touch with Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Just please do me a favor and tell them the folks here from Dog Nation sent you, and I know they'll take really good care of you. I know a lot of you are looking forward to G-Day tomorrow. One of the guys you're looking forward to seeing is Georgia running back James Cook, and it was really interesting yesterday on Thursday on Dog Nation Daily. We had a chance to hear from former Georgia running back great, a terrific coach in his own right now in the state of Georgia, Robert Edwards. And Edwards was talking about, kind of the ways in which the Georgia running backs will be used and the decision that running backs coach Dale McGee has about how he wants to use those backs this season. He says it could be kind of a game-by-game basis, evaluating who gets used. But I want you to listen in particular to the word that Robert uses to describe our subject today on Dog Nation Freeze Frame, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, James Cook. Take a listen to this, then we'll have John Stinchcomb break down exactly why this is true. Here's Robert Edwards.
I think you got to ride the hot hand. The hot hand's going to be that guy who feel like I want to outplay my teammate who sits in the room with me. So I think it's going to be a lot of 20 personnel. I think they're going to utilize these guys' talent. I think you're going to see a lot of Zamir and James Cook on the field at the same time. Maybe one of them go in motion that takes the linebacker out of the box and try to get one-on-one matchup, mismatches. Cook's a mismatch for a linebacker anywhere on the field.
So I think that's incredibly interesting from Robert Edwards there, John. I'm going to bring you in here on this, the notion that he presents a mismatch for any linebacker that's asked to cover him. And John, one of the things I've really enjoyed about this series of freeze frame videos that we've done here over the course of the last few weeks is when we look at these offensive guys, you've kind of started us off by looking at what's happening pre-snap, because it certainly seems like in the modern game, and Todd Monken's obviously quite adept at this, that so much of your advantage happens before that ball is snapped, with how you're putting guys in motion, how you're lining them up, how you're creating those different looks for the defense to have to play the guessing game of, what is it this opposing offense is trying to do to us. And when it comes to James Cook, there may not be a more interesting player on the entire Georgia offensive roster than Cook in terms of how he gets used in kind of pre-snap situations, whether it's next to the quarterback in a traditional one-back situation, or as Robert alluded to, maybe at times in those, two-back alignments, and then sometimes just emptying the backfield and becoming what is essentially an extra wide receiver.
Well, and it all is based on the fact that he's one of the best playmakers that Georgia has. His top-end speed, his agility is what sets him apart. I mean, he's not a power back. He's not going to break the tackles like you see with Zamir White and Milton and really the rest of the running back room. What he brings is some elite quickness and speed and burst. And those mismatches that Coach Edwards now, not just Robert Edwards, great running back, former Georgia guy. If anybody knows the position, it's him. But it's the mismatches that he creates. You look at the Alabama game, and his standard formation is shotgun, single back, lined up next to the quarterback. It's third and long. That's usually how he's deployed. But there's so much variety that you can create pre-snap to get an advantage. Just personnel groupings alone to see what is your opponent going to do? What kind of personnel are they going to put out on the field? Are they going to leave a linebacker in and face him up with James Cook? Not a good matchup for them. What we saw in Alabama, they moved James Cook out to wide receiver. He's matched up with an inside linebacker out on the edge of the field. Who doesn't love those odds? James Cook's one of the fastest players in the SEC. He runs a go route. It's a touchdown. So just pre-snap, having the ability to create mismatches and also give your quarterback an advantage of understanding what the most likely coverages are from the defense is something that you can really exploit when you've got a guy as talented as James Cook, who's equally adept as a running back as he is a wide receiver.
So what does it do to a defense? You've told us before that when you send a guy in motion, it becomes kind of a man-to-man coverage reader, and you've explained that to us before on a previous edition of this show. But when you do have what you're used to seeing from Georgia, that back in the backfield, in certain situations it will be James Cook, but when he kind of goes out wide, when you leave the empty backfield, and in addition to putting what you just said and what Edward said as kind of a mismatch situation, what else does that do to opposing defenses when all of a sudden you've got Cook becoming that extra receiver on the field?
Well, the first thing a defense has to do is decide what personnel grouping you're sending out here. Are you treating James? Let's say we have two running backs in the game, and one of them is James Cook. Are you treating James Cook as a second running back, meaning you're most likely leaving a linebacker in the game? Or are you going to treat him more as a wide receiver and bring in either your nickel or dime cornerback in that slot situation? Either way, there's ways that Georgia can exploit that matchup. Early in a game, they'll probably have a good feel for what a defense is wanting to do personnel-wise when James Cook and one of the other running backs is on the field. That's a huge advantage. When you put him in motion, when you line him up in the slot and run him across the field like we did against Missouri. I mean, one of his touchdowns for James Cook, he starts off in the slot, it's jet motion, and he runs a jet sweep for what looks like a pretty easy touchdown. I think a very similar play happens against Florida. So there's multiple plays and ways that you're trying to, you set him as a wide receiver and you use him as a running back. You start him as a running back, you motion him out and use him as a wide receiver. So because of his ability, you can put the defense in binds, and 1 year down the road with your offensive coordinator who knows how to exploit mismatches. I mean, that's all the NFL does, is how can we create mismatches and unique situations to utilize the guys in our room to the best of their ability. Well, James Cook's one of those guys. James Cook is one of those guys that is a matchup nightmare for most defense.
I want to take you to a moment in the South Carolina game coming in the first quarter when you do see James kind of lined up, as part of what Robert Edwards a moment ago called, 20 personnel, those two running backs on the field together. This is something you see NFL teams do, a good bit. Kyle Shanahan, Bill Belichick, some of the smartest coach, obviously Josh McDaniel calling plays for him, but some of the smartest coaching staffs in football are using those two back alignments, pretty frequently. Jimbo Fisher does this at the SEC level there at Texas A&M a bit. And I have to say, I'm kind of a fan of that kind of look, whether it be the traditional stuff that Georgia doesn't really do of, fullback in front of tailback, but just two backs on the field together, as happened in the South Carolina game. To me, this is something I do think would be interesting if Georgia could find a way to do that more. You see an example of that there from the game against South Carolina. How much more of that do you think we might see from James here coming up in the 2021 season?
Our running back room is so loaded. There's so much talent. You're trying to get those guys on the field and press the defense. When you have, this isn't the old two back set that, happened in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s where a defense says they have two running backs on the field. Well, one of them is a fullback that is an extra blocker or a short yardage, 1 or 2 yard expected rush guy. This isn't those situations. What we've created is two very capable running backs on the field at a given time, and it keeps everybody on us. You can expect James Cook to motion out of those and leave a single back, or have split flow motion where you're trying to divide the running backs and put binds on those safeties. That's how they fill the hole.
And of course, if you're going to play two backs with Cook in the game, then he really, and let's just get down to brass tacks here, he needs to be as effective as a pass catcher as the receiver you've taken off the field to make room for James Cook right there. And, we saw him have an 85-yard touchdown against Alabama. That obviously gets a lot of headlines. But as you watched film closely of Cook this week, whether it be that game against Alabama or other performances that he had, what do you see from him as a pass catcher?
Well, I'm not a huge stat guy, but he was top 4 receiver on the team last year. So he's a guy that they trust as a receiver. You look at his route, in addition to the touchdown play against Alabama where he's lined up as a wide receiver, you see a variety of routes that he runs out of the backfield. The angle route, he's running out routes, flare routes. They're setting up screens for him. I mean, he's a guy that they trust his hands. He's a very reliable pass catcher. And that's what you come to expect with your third down back, which is his primary role. Shotgun, single back, lined up next to the quarterback. He's looking to pick up that extra blitzer. If it's not there, you want to get him out on a route. Or if they do bring a blitzer, he's your hot check that who doesn't love James Cook with the ball in his hands and nothing but space in front of him. So it's one of those guys that you have to have trust in his receiving ability. And he's proven time and time again to be a very capable receiver.
And for a guy like JT Daniels, who's shown some comfort in this offense, shown the ability to kind of work through his progressions, knowing that you've got, that kind of mismatch in front of you, I think makes it probably a little bit easier for him at the quarterback spot there as well, probably also.
Absolutely. And it helps out the wide receivers too, because it forces the linebackers or the safety to respect the fact that there is a capable receiver coming out of the backfield more often than not. If he's not in motion, you go empty backfield, which they do from time to time because he's just as capable lining up in the slot or at X or the widest wide receiver, which we saw. I continue to reference it because he smoked an inside linebacker lined up at basically what would amount to a quarterback position. And JT Daniels, a very heady, smart quarterback, recognizes that matchup and you exploit it.
So in these moments like the one you're describing there, is it fair to say that Georgia never looks more like an NFL offense than it does when it's finding a way to use James Cook like that? Because if you're watching the brand of football that's played on Sundays, that is so much of what you're seeing. There are obviously spread concepts in place, but those athletic running backs who are used in creative ways, that seems to be a real hallmark of the NFL game. And to me, the pro-style elements of the Georgia offense really come to fruition when you're using James Cook in that manner.
Well, reflect back to our freeze frame where we're talking about Darnell Washington and the variety of ways that the tight end doesn't always line up at the end next to the tackle with his hand in the ground. He lined up as the widest wide receiver and would motion in. He's the wing player and comes across the formation. I mean, there's a variety of ways that you deploy these players. It's not your traditional, you're labeled a running back, you line up 3 yards behind the quarterback. That doesn't happen anymore. There's such variety of ways that you're trying to create situations to put the defense in binds because they're certainly doing the same against offense. So when you've got players that are capable of doing more than one thing, James Cook being the receiver as adept as he is a running back in a traditional sense, you can exploit that. You can create those mismatch, just like Darnell Washington with his size. You can use him as an inline blocker, but you can also flex him out as a slot wide receiver, just like you would James Cook, and try to make those matchups even harder for a defense.
I want to let you hear one more clip from former Georgia running back Robert Edwards on Dog Nation Daily from Thursday, comparing how a lot of the running backs that we'll see for Georgia on Saturday for G-Day and the upcoming season, Zamir White, James Cook, 2 guys coming back to their senior year, Kendall Milton about to enter his second year in the program, how their running styles, when you're using Cook as a traditional tailback, how those running styles differ. A little more from Robert Edwards here.
You got Zamir White, who's going to be that bell cow type of running back. And then you got James Cook, who can also run in between the tackles, but he's more effective outside the box. And then you got Kendall Milton, who's a kind of a combination of both of those guys. I mean, they got a loaded backfield.
So I think it's interesting from Robert Edwards there, and I love the phrase he uses. Zamir White obviously is that kind of bell cow type guy, the kind of guy that'll get the hard yards for you in the SEC. You have to have that. Obviously, there's a lot of enthusiasm about what Kendall Milton might be able to provide as a dynamic running back who can do a lot of things for you. But the phrase that Edwards uses there is interesting on James Cook. We obviously think of him as the outside runner, the kind of guy that can show that burst of speed that way. But as Edwards also alluded to, this is also a guy that maybe does at times a little more between the tackles than sometimes we probably assume he does when we close our eyes and picture what James Cook does. There's actually a little more of some of those hard yards that he occasionally gets that maybe people are kind of aware of.
It was the most surprising thing that I was shocked when I watched his film at how many plays, big plays, that he created between the tackles. I mean, the defense is spread out. It's usually 4 wide receiver set. James Cook is the lone running back next to JT Daniels. It was also next to Dwan Mathis and Stetson Bennett during this season. And they would run between the tackles, and he's busting the seams. I mean, his explosion through the line, he's not breaking the tackles like Milton is or Zamir. That's not his game. But his explosion, his patience to see that hole and hit it with speed, he's not just a receiver. He's not just the screen guy. It's not, we've got to toss and get him outside the numbers on every play. He made a number of plays this past year, either off tackle or between the tackles, which I think it was surprising to me. I'm sure fans are going, not what I expected. It certainly wasn't when I watched the film. I don't think this guy is just as capable in between the tackles as he is out in space.
How much of that would you say is a function of a more spread out Georgia offense that makes it more difficult for defenses to put defenders inside that tackle box the way they may have in previous years? How much of what you just described is a function of that?
It very much. They work hand in hand, right? James Cook, again, you have to know the skills that he possesses. He's got great speed. He's super quick. He's got good vision, and he's shifty. So if you're trying to line up in an I formation with a fullback and you're running downhill power, probably got better options than James Cook in this situation, right? Zamir White, Kendall Milton, they've proved time and time again, they don't mind lowering their shoulder a little bit and grinding out some yards, breaking tackles. Not really James Cook's MO. But what you can do, you put 4 wide receivers on the field, you spread out the defense, you bring an extra nickel back into the game. They've got an extra secondary player. And now you're making the lone Mike linebacker and the 2 defensive tackles in the middle of the field say, maybe I can't just rush the passer. I've got to play the run game a little bit because this James Cook guy is pretty capable when they hand him the ball and he's running between the tackles. That's something that if you've done film study, you're going, this guy can actually run between the tackles and create some really big opportunities for this Georgia offense.
I'll finish with this. I'm curious of your opinion. Do NFL teams, how much more of that do they want to see from him? Are they content with the Swiss Army knife style package that you get from Cook? Or do they also want to see him do what we've seen other durable Georgia running backs do in recent years, which is, be the kind of running back you just described there?
Well, I think you look at most NFL teams right now, and they've got 2 running backs on their roster, and they complement one another, right? They got their first and second down guy and then their third down guy. Well, James Cook is never going to change his stripes and become this tackle-busting hammer. That's not his game. So what? NFL teams want a guy that they can create plays for and trust as a receiver out of the backfield. What does James Cook need to do to increase his draft status and prospect as an NFL? Keep doing what he's doing. Have those opportunities and exploit them. When given the opportunity, the guy, all the film I watched, I didn't see him drop a pass. I didn't see him miss a cut. Whatever yards were given, he took those and he usually got more. I mean, you see him run past linebackers. You see him break angles on safeties. I mean, the guy he exploited the opportunities that he was given. If I'm advising James Cook, keep doing what you're doing because you've earned those opportunities. And when given them, you're making the most of everyone that you're given. And I'm sure that Coach Monken and that entire offensive staff is going, this is a guy we can trust. We can give him more opportunities, and that only is going to increase his status. But you're looking at a top 3 rusher from this team last year and top 4 receiver. Those are pretty good statistics to hang your hat on.
That's a great way to sum it all up. It's our Dog Nation Freeze Frame presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. John, I hope you enjoy G-Day tomorrow and hope you get a chance to see everything you want to see. Thanks for helping us break down James Cook. We'll look forward to doing one of these with you again very soon. And, of course, chatting with you very soon here on Dog Nation as well.
It's always a fun time. Go Dogs.
And to all of our dog fans tuning in today, hope all of you enjoy G-Day there as well. Thanks for letting us preview it with you here right now. One of the big players, both for tomorrow's spring scrimmage, obviously the upcoming season. Thanks for being here on our Dog Nation Freeze Frame presented by Pella Window in Dorp, Georgia. Have a great weekend. We'll look forward to speaking to all of you soon also.